Good morning. Right, let's just remind ourselves. 100 Tory MPs rebel against COVID measures. A crushing, humiliating by-election defeat by the Lib Dems. The top civil servant charged with investigating Christmas parties in Downing Street moved aside because of reports that his office held a Christmas party. And last night, Lord Frost, previously the most loyal of Boris Johnson's senior ministers, quits because he doesn't like the way things are going. Oh yes, and ministers are arguing about whether new lockdown measures should be announced possibly within the next few days. If somebody made a film about this week in British politics, and they will, there's only one possible title: The Nightmare Before Christmas. For the very latest on the Omicron surge, I'll be talking to the Health and Social Care Secretary, Sajid Javid. And after a major incident is declared in London, to the Mayor there, Labour's Sadiq Khan. This is the last ever BBC Andrew Marr show, and my wonderful team have been looking back on 16 years of Sunday mornings. And David Tennant will be live in the studio later to tell us how he's been around the world in 80 days in time for Christmas.
You really think you can cross the entire globe in just 80 days?
Certainly, madame. Or die trying. And let the adventure begin.
Plus, we'll have some seasonal music from two young members of the talented Kanneh-Mason family, Jeneba and Konya. Reviewing the news on this momentous morning, Laura Hughes from the Financial Times and Jane Moore from The Sun. But first, the news headlines from Chris Mason.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning. The Brexit Minister, Lord Frost, has resigned, citing concerns over the current direction of the government, including its approach to tax and COVID restrictions. It's another setback to the Prime Minister after the defeat in the North Shropshire by-election and a backbench rebellion against new COVID measures in England. Lord Frost led the UK's negotiations over the EU withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's been a significant rise in the number of Omicron cases in the UK, with 10,000 reported yesterday. It comes amid calls for tougher restrictions before the end of the year. In London, the Mayor Sadiq Khan has declared a major incident, warning that the NHS in the capital is at risk of being overwhelmed. Germany will ban most travellers from Britain from entering the country from 11 o'clock tonight UK time as it tries to slow the spread of the Omicron variant. German citizens and residents will still be able to travel, but they'll need evidence of a negative COVID test and will then have to isolate at home for 2 weeks, regardless of whether they've been vaccinated. And a month-long lockdown has come into force in the Netherlands this morning. All but essential shops will shut until mid-January, as will bars, restaurants and cinemas. Schools and colleges will also remain closed. The Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, said immediate action was needed to prevent hospitals becoming unmanageable. That's all from me. The next news here on BBC One at 1 o'clock. And Andrew, on behalf of all of those who've sat in this chair over the last umpteen years, we wish you all the best.
That's very, very kind of you, Christopher. Now, thank you very much for that. And as ever, to the papers. Lots to read today. The bombshell story overnight about the resignation of Lord Frost was a Mail on Sunday scoop and exclusive. Now the Minister for Brexit walks out on Boris, it says, picked up by almost all the other papers. There's the Sunday Telegraph. Frost quits Cabinet as Johnson considers Christmas lockdown. We'll talk about that later on, of course, as well. And the Observer is also focusing on COVID. The sage scientists warn, bring in more curbs now, they say, or infections could hit 2 million a day. The Mirror has a version of that, the peak midwinter, they call it. And the Sunday Times has a story about what might happen to avoid that all happening. COVID patients treated at home to protect the NHS, they predict, and that'll involve pills and assessment of people at home. We're going to talk about all of those stories, I am sure, but let's start off with Lord Frost. Frosty. He's not a very well-known figure, but it's very important for the Prime Minister that he has gone. It's a bad, bad moment.
Yes, it's a bad, bad moment politically. As you say, I think around the country, a lot of people might go, Lord who? If you showed the electorate a photo of him, many of them would struggle to... But he is a political heavyweight within Westminster. He was known as Boris's Brexit brain. And yeah, it's very, very serious. And
just the background is he's been negotiating over the Northern Ireland border, and within the last few days, Britain has moderated its position, or in some people's views, slightly surrendered on the question of the European Court.
Yeah, I mean, it says here in the Mail on Sunday piece, it says that obviously his disillusionment with Boris is one of the factors, and as you said there, Plan B, tax hikes, green agenda. But it also says that in particular, they felt that he'd had enough of his current role, which involved endless, exhausting skirmishes with Brussels, the nature of the beast. But what I find very fascinating about this story is that, you know, obviously sources say, there's a lot of briefing going on behind the scenes, but it says his stance reflects Rishi Sunak's concerns about being strong-armed by Number 10 into introducing measures such as, you know, the 1.25 percentage point, etc., etc. It's very much aligning him to what Rishi Sunak thinks. So I do wonder, is he on a promise to return
now there's a thought.
Rishi Sunak takes over?
Well, we'll talk a lot about the different tribes in the Tory party swirling around. Laura Hughes, who joins us from a Saxon fort, as far as I can see. Welcome. Let's talk a little bit more about Lord Frost, because he's somebody who was a negotiator in Brussels himself, and one of the papers says he learned to dislike the EU from close up. Early in his career, he then went on to work for the Scotch Whisky Association, brought into the House of Lords by Boris Johnson. Just tell us a little bit more about Lord Frost and why he matters.
Well, as you mentioned, both Frost and also Boris Johnson spent some of their early 20s and 30s actually working out in Brussels. And the reason these two men were so significant is that Boris Johnson's quite hard to pin down when it comes to his ideology. But Lord Frost was considered to be someone who could speak the Prime Minister, could speak with authority, particularly on the issue of Brexit. These two were ideologically aligned, and that's why it's so damning. Put the EU issues to one side. It's a really interesting piece in the Sunday Times that reflects the fact that his resignation from government is a sort of indication that there are really senior Conservatives very close to the Prime Minister who feel that the soul of the Conservative Party is being drawn from beneath their feet by the Prime Minister and the direction of government he's taking. And
we had the rebellion last week over the COVID restrictions, but, you know, higher taxes, COVID restrictions, attitudes to Europe are all being bound together by a big faction of people on the right of the Conservative Party. And they're starting to come together in a way that might be a little bit menacing for the Prime Minister. A very interesting story today on WhatsApp, which I'm sure you've been looking at as well, where there's a group of more right-wing Conservatives on WhatsApp, and one of them was Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, who popped up to defend the Prime Minister and was promptly removed from the group by Steve Baker.
It was pretty extraordinary. Sky News got hold of these WhatsApp messages, and I think it's a perfect indication of where the party are in terms of their concern about what's happening. Because actually what Lord Frost's resignation sends as a signal to some very hardcore Eurosceptic MPs is that Boris Johnson is about to capitulate over the Northern Ireland Protocol. And they feel that his departure signals worse to come. And that's why they're so incredibly fractious right now and turning in on each other. And I've never seen a WhatsApp exchange between Tory MPs quite so. I mean, this is the culture sector.
So this might be, Jane, one of the ways in which Boris Johnson can protect himself in the next few days and weeks, because you've got these different Tory groups with very, very different views about their philosophy, eyeing each other up. And they may all agree that they would quite like at the moment to get rid of Boris Johnson, but what they can't agree is who should take over.
Yes.
And the papers are full of various camps manoeuvring and swirling. You can see them moving through the papers. We've got Jeremy Hunt, we've got Liz Truss, we've got Rishi Sunak.
Yep. And I thought the Sun on Sunday piece by Isabel Oakeshott was quite funny. She sort of likened Boris to an old jalopy. You know, he's a half-decent old car that's had a nasty crash. But she's sort of like saying, well, do you keep that old car to take you to the next part of the journey, or do you scrap it and get a new model, i.e. Rishi Sunak, she's suggesting here. He is the Tesla, immaculate, high-performing and reassuringly expensive. But as you rightly say, I think it is a case of watch this space, and maybe the thing that does keep Boris in until maybe at least the spring is that nobody particularly wants to step up now, because there is going to be quite a lot more bad news coming, I think, over COVID.
So this all started with those videos of Allegra Stratton, his former spokesperson, joking about the party, which was leaked to the Mirror, and that really has provoked this set of crises, one after another. And there's more to come in the Mail on Sunday again, a very, very interesting and ominous story.
It is. And I must say, at the time, and this is purely my personal opinion, but I remember seeing Allegra Stratton outside her house, you know, obviously very, very visibly upset, and thinking, does she know that something else is coming? Because it seemed a very extreme reaction. And sure enough, here in the Mail on Sunday today, they are saying Number 10 is braced for fresh embarrassment. Now, it seems that there were other questions asked, and it says a source has said the worst could be yet to come. Other mock scenarios in this fictional press conference included questions about the mistresses of Boris and his love children. So,
you can just visualise the jokes about that could spill into the public arena.
Of course.
And so they say everybody is kind of on tenterhooks and very, very worried about what's to come next.
And as you said also, I just wanted to point out here they've chosen this very smug picture of Jeremy Hunt at the bottom here, circling around, putting himself into pole position. So,
Laura, let's turn to what you could argue is the really important politics behind all this going on at the moment, which is this appears to be very tense meeting between government sage advisors, the scientists on the one hand and a group of senior cabinet ministers on the other, looking at whether or not the country is going to have to face even tighter restrictions in the run-up to Christmas, or even on Boxing Day and in the run-up to the New Year. Just talk us through that.
Yes, so at the heart of this, you have scientists who advise the government warning that if stricter measures aren't introduced very, very quickly, we could see 600 people dying by February, 3,000 hospital admissions a day at the beginning of the new year. And clearly, this is incredibly worrying in terms of the pressure that would put on the NHS. On the other hand, you have a Prime Minister who is desperate not to ruin Christmas for a second year in a row. He has a huge amount of backlash within his own party about imposing any tighter measures at this point. Members of his cabinet incredibly concerned about the impact that this will have on the economy. The main concern at the moment that a lot of Conservatives have is that what we're seeing is, in effect, a lockdown by stealth, where people aren't going out to restaurants.
Voluntary lockdown, almost.
Exactly. And so people aren't turning up at restaurants, but restaurants aren't getting any support from the government. And it's a very, very thin line the government is treading at the moment. And looking at the data coming out, there is huge pressure on the Prime Minister. So I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that we are going to see more measures introduced. I would expect after Christmas.
All right.
Because
Jane,
desperate to get through this bit.
Thanks, Laura. Jane, one of the things people say sometimes is this is all tittle-tat, all this stuff going about Downing Street parties. It doesn't really matter. You could argue that the reason that it matters is that if Boris Johnson believes that he must introduce more restrictions now, he is politically too weak to do so.
Yeah, I think there's an element now where people are sort of self-regulating. I think if you go out and about, and I think Laura's absolutely right, the critical point here is that because there is a lack of clarity, bars and restaurants are really, really struggling because, you know, there's no furlough, there's no sort of defined policy on being actually shutting down. And I think if we took the New York policy, in New York, they've still doing outside dining. A lot of people are still wearing masks inside and outside. People are sort of censoring,
they seem to be real rule takers in New York.
But Bill de Blasio has absolutely said we will not lock down. He's done clarity, but people are taking personal responsibility. And I think, you know, what we've got here, we seem to have this policy of freedom, emergency stop. Freedom, emergency stop.
I could talk all day about this, but we are running out of time. Jane, there was one other story that you were going to mention about the effect of the COVID lockdown on people who haven't got COVID.
Yes, this
Express,
story.
I think,
it is incredibly depressing, but it's a Sunday Express spread, and it's Oxford scientists have called for an urgent inquiry. They said tens of thousands of non-COVID deaths during the pandemic lockdown, elderly, isolated, lonely, neglected, obviously, you know, lack of staff going in, lack of visitors keeping an eye, and so on. So, yeah.
All right, well, that is it for the final paper review. Laura, I wanted to come back to you. We ran out of time. Sorry about that, but thank you very much, both of you, for that.
And congratulations on your last show.
That's very, very kind of you, Jane. Thank you so much. You've been here over many, many years past. Now, one thing I won't miss about the programme, however, is thinking of something unexpected to say about the weather every week. This week, it was quite warm, and then it was quite cold, and now it's quite foggy. For one last time, over to Sarah Keith-Lucas in the Weather Centre. Sarah.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, you just really summed it up perfectly there. It's got colder and it's got foggier as well out there. In fact, last night was the coldest night of the autumn and winter so far. We had temperatures down at -8.9 Celsius at Braemar in Aberdeenshire. And today, yes, some fog patches lingering, but some of us will see a bit of sunshine around. There's quite a lot of cloud that's lingering for central and eastern parts, low cloud, mist and fog as well. So take care on the roads this morning. Best of any sunshine today will be for western Scotland, northwest England, Wales, and parts of Northern Ireland and southwest England too. But it's not going to feel particularly warm, around about 3 to 9 degrees. And the cloud thick enough for the odd spot of light rain and drizzle at times. That's going to be the case as we head through tonight as well. A bit of mist and fog, but not as extensive as recent nights. And again, a frost across parts of Scotland, perhaps northern England, but not quite those very low temperatures that we saw last night. Now, tomorrow, mostly dry once again, fairly cloudy, but there'll be a little bit more sunshine breaking through across parts of central and eastern England compared to recent days. Temperatures just 2 degrees in Aberdeen, up to about 9 in Plymouth. And the look ahead towards the festive period, it's dry and cold for the next few days, and then we're expecting something a little bit more unsettled towards Christmas. Back to you, Andrew.
Sarah, thank you so much. Now then, Omicron cases in London are increasing at an alarming rate. It's become the test bed for the rest of the country, and the Labour Mayor of London is Sadiq Khan. Welcome, Sadiq Khan. Can I ask you about your state of emergency that you've declared? The last time you did this, the numbers of COVID patients in hospitals in London were about a fifth of what they were last time you declared. So they are a fifth now of what they were last time. So why have you done it now?
Well, I'm afraid over the last few days we've seen a major surge of Omicron. So although those in hospital is less than it was this time last year, including those on ventilators, the number of positive cases is way above. So in the last 24 hours, Andrew, we've had almost 30,000 confirmed new cases. In the last 7 days, more than 130,000 confirmed new cases. So the direction of travel is only going one way, cases doubling over 2 days. But here's the big problem. Those who work in the NHS, think of GPs, A&Es, in hospitals, ambulances, but also the fire service, police service, local authorities. They're seeing record numbers of staff absences, and the worry is our ability to look after people who are either unwell or need public services. That's why we've declared the major emergency. The Prime Minister's convened a COBRA. I won't be there, I'm not invited. We're hoping, though, he understands the scale of the challenges our city is facing.
Do you want him to bring in new restrictions?
Well, I think if new restrictions are brought in, and by the way, it's inevitable, there must be a major package of financial support for our hospitality, culture and retail. December is the crucial month for them. People have cancelled bookings, people are not going to the West End, so the government must step in because the health of individuals is linked to the health of our economy.
So that's really interesting, but I was asking you, do you think we need new restrictions?
I think it's inevitable. I think the key thing, though, is for us to have a cool, calm discussion around COBRA, look at the science, look at the trends, but I think if we don't bring in new restrictions sooner rather than later, you're going to see even more positive cases and potentially public services like the NHS on the verge of collapse, if not collapsing.
So what new restrictions and when?
I think one of the things we need to be looking into is what can we do to reduce the spread of the transmission. And that one of the things we can do is less social mixing. Well, one of the things that I do know is the impacts on people's well-being and mental health by not mixing. So Christmas is important, even for those of us that don't celebrate religiously. You get time off, you get to see your family. So I think we should be able to celebrate Christmas safely. But I think sooner rather than later, we're going to have to look at social distancing. We're going to have to look at household mixing. Because if we don't, the number of cases is only going one way. And the issue isn't the seriousness of the consequences. It's not just that. It's also the numbers of people who have the virus.
So, as the boss of London, as it were, a lot of Londoners very worried at the moment, wondering how they should behave over the next few days and weeks. We'll be looking to you for a lead. Can I ask you, do you think people should be going to pubs and restaurants now?
If they can do so safely. One of the things I've realised speaking
they
to...
can do so safely. What does that mean?
So pubs, restaurants, bars have worked so hard to make their places COVID safe. So before you go out, do a lateral flow test. Make sure you keep a social distance where you can. Wear a face mask where you can't keep a social distance. Make sure you've been boosted. Yesterday we had more than 100,000 boosters in our city. Every minute we're boosting 100 more people. So, make an appointment, go to one of our walk-in centres. We have now had more than 2.5 million Londoners receiving the booster. There are still many more who are need a booster. But also get your first vaccine and your second one as well.
Should Londoners be planning New Year parties?
I think it depends what sort of parties you're planning. If with your family, direct family at home, of course, that's fine. I think you've got to recognise, if you're meeting with strangers, if you have not had your lateral flow test on that day, if you can't keep your social distance, if there's not good ventilation, you may be passing the virus on if you've got it without showing symptoms, or you may be getting it. I'd err on the side of caution.
Chris Whitty, the government advisor, has said, don't mix with people you don't have to. And that would sound to many people like don't have parties.
Yeah, well, listen, I've not had the benefit, I'm afraid, of listening to Chris Whitty directly, but I trust Chris Whitty. He's got the experience, the expertise, and he's got the data. And if that's the advice from the chief medical officer, I'd rather listen to him than others who are advising against that.
It seems to me that what's going on at the moment is that we don't have an official lockdown, underpinned by legislation and law and the government. We've got a kind of informal lockdown. You walk around London and you look in pub windows at 8 o'clock in the evening and they're almost empty. Restaurants having a really hard time. A whole series of big shows have closed in the West End. How serious is the crisis now for the centre of London?
It's potentially existential. I've been spending a lot of time over the last week speaking to those who run our theatres, run our hotels, run our bars, run our restaurants, run live music. They've seen bookings cancelled by more than 50%. They've seen fewer people going to their businesses than at this time in previous Decembers. Many of these businesses will go bust. And by the way, 1 out of 6 jobs in our city are in hospitality or culture. That's why it's crucial for the government. So it's to say, by the way, it's cheaper to support businesses with grants, with business rates relief and with furlough than allowing them to go bust.
Sadiq Khan, this existential crisis wouldn't have been happening if earlier on you'd been able to get the number of people vaccinated and boosted much higher. We've talked about this endlessly on the programme, but again and again and again we talk about there's going to be a new programme to get more people vaccinated, and it frankly doesn't work. What's going wrong?
Well, notwithstanding, in London there being a younger population, more mobile, more diverse, less likely to be registered with a GP, the numbers of vaccines is going up hugely. 15.5 million vaccines in our city, 2.5 million boosters, and
but
each
the
day
percentage
more and more.
is still very low compared to the rest of the country.
Well, it isn't compared to other global cities. If we were speaking a few weeks ago, London had the fewest number of cases. The case rate was the lowest. We were lowest in the country by region. We're now the highest. Why? Because of the surge of Omicron.
Is there anything more you can do right now to get more people in London vaccinated?
And we are, yes, we are. So we're working with those in black communities, Jewish communities, Muslim communities, Eastern Europeans to get more and more of those not vaccinated at all receiving the vaccine. And here's some good news. In the last week alone, more than 30,000 first-time vaccines, more than 33,000 receiving second dose. Each day, more and more are stepping up. My message to those watching is the vaccine gives you an extra layer of protection. The booster protects you by more than 30%. Speak to your friends, your families, your neighbours. Ask them the question, have they received the first vaccine, the second vaccine, and then the booster?
Now, last week on the show, Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, said that it looked as though Boris Johnson had broken the law over the Christmas party last year. Do you agree?
From what I've seen, I've not looked at the evidence, it does appear that way. What's important, though, is for us to understand that actually if rule makers are seen to be rule breakers, it's hardly surprising when people don't follow additional announcements made by the government.
So you're in charge of how the Met spends its money. Should the Metropolitan Police therefore be investigating this breaking of the law?
It's very important, because I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner, I allow the police to have operational independence. Just imagine if me as a politician directed the police to investigate a politician from a different party? What confidence would the public have?
Would it be a
in our
waste?
police?
But you are in charge of the money. Would it be a waste of money for the Metropolitan Police to investigate the Downing Street party?
No, that's a smart Andrew Marr way of asking me the same question another way. And by the way, listen, as somebody who sat in the hot seat over many times over your last 16 years, I'm going to fall into that trap, Andrew. And by the way, congratulations on your last show. Best of luck for the future.
Luckily, I'm from Dundee, so I won't get emotional. Thanks very much indeed. Now then, this is my last morning on my last TV programme on the BBC. After 17 years presenting this show, my team have had a look back at some of the most memorable moments. Welcome.
Well, pleasure to be at the start of a new programme.
It's very kind of you to come here.
Art, music.
Art, music and everything. Wave goodbye and don the swimming trunks and walk away from it all.
I need a different pair of swimming trunks.
Different pair of swimming trunks. What went wrong, do you think?
I don't think it has gone wrong.
Towards the end, I think, frankly, it was hard going on, impossible.
It was like Lovers, you said. It was as intense and close as that.
Yeah, I mean, let me sort of qualify that.
Boris, you mentioned the word Dalek earlier on, so we've obliged.
Yeah, it's got me surrounded.
Touring round and you're still getting a buzz out of it.
What a wonderful interviewer you are. Much nicer than I was.
Do you know what Mugabe has done? He's taken people's identity and literally, if you don't mind, cut it to pieces. This is what he's actually done to a lot of... And in the end, there's nothing. So as far as I'm concerned, from now on, I'm not going to wear a dog collar until Mugabe's gone.
I'll not be calling an election, and let me explain why.
At what point did you decide, OK, I'm going to try and go for the coalition? Do you like him?
Well, we work very well together. I am happily married, but to my wife, not to Nick Clegg, if I can put it that way.
One more night, till the morning.
Nice to see you again. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Benjamin Netanyahu has come to London, where he's been in talks with Theresa May.
Cheeky question. You're right, that is a cheeky question.
I'll be right.
David Cameron has the opportunity every week to sit down with the Queen. Would you like there to be somebody with that sense of history that you could just totally privately shoot the breeze with?
Well, I don't know if anybody shoots the breeze with Her Majesty the Queen.
Do you have a personal problem with gay people?
And I myself know some people who are gay. We're on friendly terms.
I'll be holding on.
What's important is not to make people think or believe that it's possible to have
your cake and eat it.
Exactly.
Can I ask you why people are kneeling, blindfolded and shaven and being led to trains in modern China? What is going on there? Are you going to put a collar back on again now, Archbishop?
Andrew, I promise that when Mugabe goes, I'll put my collar on. So I have no choice.
If you lose the referendum, do you stay as Prime Minister? You can't, can you?
No, the answer to that is yes.
Let's move on from Twitter trucks just for a second. We do need to move on. We've got a lot to cover.
Well, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to cover.
Well, I get to ask. It's not the Boris Johnson show, it's the Andrew Marr show. I get to ask the questions.
The NHS is about as safe with them as a pet hamster would be with an ant-hungry python.
You brought down David Cameron, then you brought down Boris Johnson. Some people are saying that you are a kind of political serial killer.
It's about the national interest.
It's just that people can listen to that kind of thing and think it's a bit robotic.
No, it's...
You lost the election. You accept that?
We didn't win the election.
I mean, Theresa May is a dead woman walking. It's just how long she's going to remain on death row.
A lady with not a lot of rhythm in her, you know, braving and doing something like that.
Time flies by in the yellow and green. Stick around and you'll see what I mean. There's a
Lovely to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, man.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Computer.
I'll be riding shotgun underneath the hearts I'm feeling.
What do you think about Trump describing Merrill as overrated?
You
kind of see what he has a point.
I've spent some time with a lady.
But you're going to be a really big, thanks to Netflix, internationally known figure. I'm sorry, but you are. Are you ready for that? It's going to be extraordinary.
Am I ready for that? I mean, yeah.
Do you think hell is real? Is hell there?
Oh, that's a very major question for a
Sunday morning question.
Yes, it's a very Sunday morning question.
You're working very hard, and your partner, what's his name? Are you going to be happy with Donald Trump as your next president?
I'll be riding shotgun.
Do you ever see yourself, like some other actors, going into politics?
No, no.
You still feel a connection?
Connection? Well, yes. We're together still.
Have you actually matured?
I don't know. I mean, you know.
Okay, you can sing. You can sing.
I can hit a note.
It's your advice to the kind of younger generation who maybe haven't been able to handle it quite so well.
I say, live a clean life and don't do as I do.
Thanks very, very much.
Nice to meet you.
Don't say that. You can't say that at the end.
I'm slightly starstruck.
Schools closed, streets empty, pubs and restaurants ordered shut, some never to reopen again. Millions of us effectively locked into our own homes. How are you managing out there in Norfolk?
Just hunkered down like everybody else.
We've had to work very, very fast to go through many of the stages in vaccine development that would normally take about 5 years, and we've done them in 4 months.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Right, I'll get back to work.
Vaccines are coming. A week ago today, you were sitting there waiting for the phone call to tell you whether this vaccine worked, and if so, how effectively. Just tell us a little bit about the moment when the phone rang.
I knew that we will get a call at 8, providing us this answer.
And how did you celebrate?
We sit together and had a tea together.
Your government commissioned a report into what was going to happen in this winter. And Keir Starmer said to you, have you read it? And you hadn't read it. Have you read it now? Boris Johnson, who has a turn of phrase, calls you Captain Hindsight. He says you're criticising things they used to do, but whatever they do now, you just agree with them. I'd been double jabbed earlier in the spring and felt, if not king of the world, at least almost entirely immune. And yet I got it. Was I just unlucky?
Dirty old river, must you keep rolling, flowing into the night?
It's been quite a year for this show, I have to say, a bit bumpy to say the least. It's been an extraordinary year, of course, for domestic politics and world events. I have a nasty feeling that I say that every year. Now, 2016 is a year when that overused word, extraordinary, does for once feel appropriate. Now, as I said at the top of the show, it has been quite a year. I mentioned at the beginning of the programme that we are in the turbulent teenage years of this century, and the year that's coming to an end has had all the tantrums, fights and walkouts of the most stereotypical 18-year-old.
Chilly, chilly evening time.
Those who have waited are now blessed with a calm, decisive leader they can believe in. So thank you, Gareth Southgate.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. I'm delighted to be in one of my favourite TV programmes.
But Terry and Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Talking
you.
to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Talking has been very enjoyable. Mr. President, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Now, as you'll have seen, some of the country's most popular stars have been regulars on the show over the years, even before he became Doctor Who. David Tennant was no stranger to our studio, and I'm delighted he's been able to join us once more. Let's hear, starting on Boxing Day, David's going to be on our screens in a truly spectacular adaptation of Around the World in 80 Days. I'll be talking to him in a moment, but first, a look at this breathtaking new series. It looks like it's going to be great fun, David. Yeah. I think the first time we talked, you hadn't started on Doctor Who, and you were worried about the effect on your kind of private life. You thought there'd be a bit of publicity.
It's been a long journey, Andrew. Yes. Life is very different these days, but yes, no, it's been a privilege to be part of it, and a privilege to come on here every now and again and talk about it.
Absolutely. This is a great new show. It looks spectacular.
It is great, yeah, I'm very excited.
It's set back in the Britain of the 1870s, and I wondered what it was about that period that you thought was going to make a great Christmas period.
I think there are a few stories that have that sort of cross-generational appeal, don't they? And this story, yeah, the novel was written 150 years ago, but it's it's tenacious, isn't it? This is a story we keep retelling.
And of course, it's a French novelist, Jules Verne, and
yes.
So it's a French version of what an uptight, upper-class Englishman might be like.
Exactly.
So just tell us, who really is Phineas Fogg, do you
Well,
think?
this version of Phileas Fogg, he isn't quite the same one as in the novel. In the novel, he's rather unknowable, rather enigmatic, rather zen-like. Our Phileas is a sort of a rash of anxieties. But he's very much the sort of stuffed shirt Englishman of the time. But as you say, yes, this was a Frenchman writing about Imperial Britain. So that it already has that slightly objective viewpoint, which I think justifies a Scot playing the role.
Absolutely. Last time you were on the show, you've just been doing Don Juan in Soho.
Yes.
And you're no stranger to the West End. Right now, up and down the West End, up and down Shaftesbury Avenue, show after show after show is closing. What do you think the government needs to do about that?
I don't know that there's an easy answer to it. I mean, I have friends who are in shows who are still going to work every night, which feels almost brave in the circumstances. I have friends who are sitting at home waiting for their show to reopen. I mean, nobody quite knows what happens next, do they? But it's a sector. The theatre is peculiarly affected by this. You know, theatres need people to sit together in big rooms. And earlier on in the pandemic, Rishi Sunak sort of took the plunge and helped the sector enormously. They just need to keep an eye, and they need to be there, because we lose a lot more when we come out of this if it's all gone. Yeah.
Congratulations on the Emmy for playing Dennis Nilsson. A terrifying performance, if I may say so. Really scary. You're also playing Alexander Litvinenko. Now, you can't say too much about it. It's a bit under wraps. But just tell us a little bit about why Litvinenko was a good guy to play and what you think motivated him.
Oh, I think he was motivated by a sense of injustice. This country that he loved, he saw it going down the toilet, and he did everything he could to sort of stand up and be counted. He was an incredibly brave man, and he was a British citizen, and he was murdered on our soil, and it's a story that we can never sort of shout enough about, I think. And Marina, his wife, that she has dedicated her life, really. This was not her plan, but now that her life is about making sure his story is retold, so if we can be part of that.
Now, I don't know if you're a Strictly fan, but many of us were watching the denouement last night when Rose won that. A really, really moving and emotional moment. Yeah. And I guess if Strictly is the show for people who can't dance, Phineas Fogg is the show for people who can no longer travel.
Well, quite, yes. I mean, it's almost a wish fulfillment, isn't it, going around the world in 80 days? So that gives you something to look forward to on Boxing Day.
It certainly does. David Tennant, thanks very,
Andrew,
very much indeed for
we will
joining.
miss you so much on a Sunday morning, by the way.
Miss you too,
I know you
Dennis.
don't like being showered with praise, but you are the epitome of everything that is good about this corporation. It's true. It's true. We will miss you.
That's very kind of you. Right, now, a look at what's on at 10:30 on BBC One.
On the final Sunday morning live of the year, we'll be discovering reasons to be hopeful in 2022 and looking at the nativity story in a fresh light.
We'll also have a performance from the glorious voices of the Kingdom Choir, and some old friends will drop in as well.
Join us at 10:30.
Don't tell me. Right, the Health and Social Care Secretary on this momentous morning, Sajid Javid, is with me. Welcome, Mr. Javid.
Good morning.
How much more bad news can Boris Johnson survive?
Look, it's been a tough week. It's been a tough few weeks, and what I've been very focused on is this new variant, of course, the pandemic overall, but particularly this new variant, and setting out our strategy to deal with that, our strategy to buy time so we can assess it and so we can build our defences. And I'm very happy to share with you what we know, what the very latest is that we know about the Omicron variant.
And we're certainly going to come on to that. But before we do, your former colleague, Lord Frost, clearly doesn't like the way this government is going. He doesn't like the high tax aspect of this government. He doesn't like the restrictions either. And he speaks for an awful lot of Conservatives. What do you say to people who look at you now as a government and individually and say, do you know what, this is no longer a Conservative government?
Well, I mean, first, I'm sorry to see him go. I think he's been an outstanding public servant. He's done great things for this country, not least in helping to get Brexit done. But he's resigned out of principle. I think you can see that. I know all about resigning out of government on principle. And, he's made that decision. And I think we have to respect that. He will be missed. He has his views. I think the direction of travel in government and...
Well, you think it's the wrong direction?
Well, he's entitled to his views, of course he is. And but my own view in terms of the direction of travel, dealing with this pandemic, of course, which was something that no one expected at the time that we won the last election, but also getting on with the priorities of the British people, whether that's investment in the NHS, the levelling up agenda. This is all a huge part of what the government's getting on with.
Has the pandemic obliged you to behave in a way in office that you never expected to, that you didn't, it doesn't, as it were, chime with your own ideology?
Yes. Last week I had to take the Plan B measures through Parliament. I didn't come into Parliament to restrict people's freedoms. Quite the opposite. I want to have more freedom, more opportunities. But I think that the British people do understand that this pandemic, it requires extraordinary actions, and that's what last week was, the Plan B measures.
And we saw the scale of the revolt that followed that, and then Lord Frost's resignation. Yeah. Isn't the truth now that even if the Prime Minister wanted to bring in new restrictions, or thought they were necessary, rather, he couldn't because he's too weak?
No, I don't think that's the case. I mean, first of all, we will see whether there are new restrictions or not, and we might come a bit onto discussing the Omicron variant. But if the government felt that further action had to be taken, of course, we would present that to Parliament, and it would be for Parliament to decide, as it always should be.
And you do that despite the revolt. Can I ask you directly, therefore, can you rule out new restrictions before Christmas?
Look, we are assessing the situation. It's very fast-moving. We've seen with Omicron there's a lot that we still don't know about Omicron. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. The reality is there's a lot of uncertainty. There are gaps in the data, but we must work with the data that we've got. We mustn't let perfection be enemy of the good. And the things that we have learned so far, if I may just very quickly, and I think this is important, is that what we've learned so far, that it spreads very quickly. We've seen the rise in case numbers. We know that there are a lot more people infected than there are actual case numbers, and we know that they are still doubling, those infections, every 2 to 3 days. That's observed data around the world. Secondly, we know much more about the vaccines and how they interact with the Omicron variant. We know 2 vaccines are not enough. The 3 vaccines, a booster shot, it makes a huge difference, gives you an excellent level of protection, and that's why we've been very focused on boosters. The biggest booster rollout in Europe now, over 50% of for adults boosted, and I hear that yesterday was another record day in boosters in England. But with the bit we don't know, Andrew, and this is, I think, very important, is enough about the severity of this. And that is because when you look at what's happening in South Africa, it's definitely the case that fewer people seem to be hospitalised than the Delta variant. But it's not clear yet whether that is because the virus itself is intrinsically less severe than Delta, or whether it's because South Africans have not just a younger population bit, but having gone through the Delta wave and so many South Africans having been infected with Delta, whether there's a high degree of natural sort of protection through the infection that they had.
This is a really important question. Your advisors on SPI-M say there currently remains no strong evidence that Omicron infections are either more or less severe than Delta infections. Is that your belief too?
There's no strong evidence. I accept that there's uncertainty around the severity. But what we do know, and this is just mathematically correct, is that even if severity is much less than Delta, so that a smaller percentage of people are hospitalised, a small percentage of a very large number of infections is still a large number of hospitalisations. Yes. And I can tell you a bit about people in hospital at the moment as well. From the data that we've got.
Well, I'll come on to that in just a second. But before we get there, a lot of people listening to you will be wondering, how should I now behave? So is it still your view that people should mingle with others as they normally would at Christmas, or not now?
We've been really clear on this. In fact, we heard from, I think, the Prime Minister and Chris Whitty have actually been sending the same message, which is it's time to be more cautious. We know this thing is spreading rapidly. We know already now that in London it's around 80% of infections. In England it's around 60% of infections. And we can see the case numbers rising. We're starting to see hospitalisations come in, and people naturally are acting more cautiously. And I understand that. And I think it is a time for a bit of caution. It is a time, for example, if you're going to meet someone, take a test in advance, for example.
As Health Secretary, should people go to Christmas parties?
I think, look, it's an individual. It's an individual decision for people. But let me speak about myself. In fact, most of the parties that I had planned to go to, they've been cancelled or they've been severely scaled back. I think that's true up and down the country. There are friends of mine that I know are having weddings, and it's really sad to see this, actually, that they feel like they cancel them because so many of the guests don't want to come. And it is a very difficult, challenging time for people, but people are responding to what they are seeing around them, and it's understandable.
Is what we're seeing a kind of informal, self-administered lockdown?
These are, well, I don't think it's a lockdown at all by any means, but it's what it is people taking their own individual decisions. I know that, if I'm going to see my mum, for example, who's elderly, like most very old people, she's more vulnerable than younger people, I will take a test and I might, just have not the usual amount of hugs I get from my mum. You just take a bit of caution, and I think that's a sensible response. But the most important thing that anyone can do right now is to get boosted. I just cannot emphasize enough how important that is. I was listening to Sadiq Khan earlier.
Through a lot,
yeah, and what Sadiq said, I completely agree with on vaccinations. It doesn't matter. This is nothing political about this. Whatever party you're in, I think we are united as a country in sending the message that the most important thing any one of us can do to help with this pandemic, to help ourselves, but also to help our communities, is to get vaccinated.
Not undermining any of that at all. Your scientific advisors are telling you that the booster programme and the current Plan B measures that we have are not enough to protect the NHS. Do you agree with them?
Well, when I get their advice, of course, we look at it very carefully. It's important advice. But my job as the Health Secretary and for other ministers is to gently is to challenge that advice, to question the underlying assumptions, because what they are setting out in their reports. I don't think it would be appropriate for government just to sort of take it verbatim and say, right, you've said that, this is what we're now going to do. Our job is to challenge. And also in government, our job is to think of the broader sort of impact of any potential measures, impact on businesses, on school children, on life events, and that's what we have to do as government.
In the end, ministers decide.
Of course,
but
yes.
I'm obviously interested in what the decision is going to be, whether you're interested in a circuit breaker lockdown, when those kind of measures might come in. But just let's go through the figures that SAGE have given us.
Yeah.
They say that if you don't do anything more than where we are now, which is Plan B and the booster campaign, hospital admissions could peak at between 3,000 and 10,000 a day, and deaths between 600 and 6,000. Now, there's very, very big margins of error there, we can both see. Nonetheless, that seems a huge risk to take, to go no further. Is that a risk you're willing to take?
It's a very sobering analysis. We take it very seriously. As I said, there are gaps in the data, and our scientists, of course, they recognise that. For example, on severity, on hospitalisations. But we will look at this data, we will take into account other factors, and then decide whether further action is needed or not. I do think, by the way, I think the action that we've already taken, the Plan B measures, including the communications around that, as you've just referred to, it has led.
Talking sooner rather than later, they say.
Look,
you must act sooner rather.
They are, and I understand that, and there's a point there about if you wait until data is absolutely perfect, it may well be too late, and I think that's a central point that they're making. But as ministers, as I say,
maybe too late already.
Well, we do have to challenge data and underlying assumptions. I think that is appropriate, and take into account a broader set of factors.
But to be absolutely clear, you are not ruling out a circuit breaker or some new restrictions coming in before Christmas.
There are no guarantees in this pandemic. I don't think at this point we just have to keep everything under review.
Can I ask you about the National Health Service? Is it genuinely now in danger of being overwhelmed? By which I mean people have accidents or serious conditions and they can't get into hospital.
I think there's a real risk. And let me just say a bit about hospitalisations linked to that. So as of yesterday morning, we know for certain that there were 85 people in hospitals across England with Omicron. Of course, there's thousands more with COVID-19 in general, but specifically with Omicron. So the Omicron hospitalisations are starting. And sadly, there's been 7 confirmed deaths so far. Now, that 85 might sound low, and it is in the context of hospital beds, but we do need to remember that anyone who's in hospital today, typically they were infected 17 days ago. 17 days ago, Omicron infections were about 1% of all cases Today, they're about 60%.
So it's too early
to
say, really.
So I think from that, you can deduce that hospitalizations will certainly rise. Your question was, rightly, is that does it mean that hospitals will get overwhelmed? And we can't say that at this point, but it is important to keep looking at this data and try to discern what it's telling us.
Is the biggest threat to the NHS overall at the moment that so many people are self-isolating because of these huge rises in infections? And I'm talking about shortages in the ambulance service. I know of wards in hospitals which have been prepared for Omicron or COVID patients, but where there are no longer any nurses there to serve them because they are self-isolating. In other words, it's spreading and spreading and spreading. And is there anything you can do about that?
That is a big challenge. And even before Omicron came along, the health service was massively challenged. I mean, it normally is in winter, but because of the backlog and other factors, there's a huge amount of pressure on the NHS. And I can't praise anyone working in the NHS more highly for everything that they are doing. But you're right to point to the need to isolate if you are infected, which I think is super important to do that, to try and maintain spread, will have an impact on the workforce. It will have an impact on NHS workforce. We do have, by the way, 10,000 more nurses than we did a year ago, about 3,000 more doctors. That all helps. But of course, if more isolate, it will have an impact.
Does there come a point when you say, if you have got mild infection of Omicron, if you're only very, very slightly ill, come into work anyway because we need you?
No. I think if you are infected, then especially with now what we know about Omicron, just how infectious this thing is, where it's doubling every 2 or 3 days in the community, I think it's really important to if you feel unwell, you think it might be Omicron, get tested and to self-isolate.
I remember very well when you got the job, you said, I'm not just the COVID Secretary of State, I'm the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. Now, will this lead to hospitals cancelling urgent operations?
Yes, it already has. So we've been, what I mean by that is that we have said in the last week that we are really, really focusing on the booster program for obvious reasons. It's become more important. And as the NHS has said at the start of this week, it does mean that there will be some cancellations, but they will prioritise the most urgent care, especially cancer care, rightly. But it does have an impact. I think that is right.
And you emphasised early on the importance of getting the waiting times down. What's going to happen to waiting times now?
Well, look, it's as the NHS is facing this new significant pressure, as it's preparing for what we know will be certainly more hospitalisations, it will have an impact on waiting times. I think that is the honest truth, and there's no getting away from that. But it is also the case, if the NHS didn't prepare and wasn't ready to take in these hospitalisations, that the impact on healthcare generally could be more severe. So there's no easy way in dealing with these challenges. But you're right. I'm pleased you did point out, again, that I did say, and it weighs on me heavily, that I am not just the COVID Secretary. I didn't come into this job just thinking I'm going to be the COVID Secretary of State. There are so many health and social care challenges in our country. Mental health is one of them you've picked on. And I think that we do need to remain absolutely focused on that and have the right plans, the reform plans, the funding to help deal with all
Well, you mentioned
that.
the funding there. Isn't it the truth that the extra money that's come in from the National Insurance rise is now going to have to go to this crisis?
No, I wouldn't. Look, when we announced the extra funding, we were still in a pandemic. It wasn't in the stage that we find ourselves in now. But those
so it's not going to be all swallowed up.
No. I don't think that's the case at all.
Let me ask you again about the rest of the country, because Chris Whitty said, don't mix with people you don't have to, and people listen to him up and down the country. And it's very, very, I was saying to Sadiq Khan earlier on, you walk around, you look into pubs and restaurants, and a lot of them are almost entirely empty. People have listened and they've stayed at home, as a result of which a lot of those businesses are now in really, really dire straits. They staggered on through the first part of the pandemic, and now they find they're hit by Christmas cancellations as well, and they're really, really worried. And yet the government at the moment is doing absolutely nothing for them at all.
Well, I mean, first of all, I completely recognise that just how difficult it is for businesses, especially the hospitality business, but many others. I completely get it. It's really, really tough. And I can see that in my own constituency, and I see it more broadly across the country. I don't think, though, Andrew, it's quite right to say the government's not doing anything at all. The emergency loan scheme for COVID is still in place. It was extended until, I think, summer next year. The business rates relief is in place. The hospitality VAT rate is 12.5%. There's £250 million sitting dealing with local councils and others to help the businesses most affected. So there is support
We both
there.
know that they want a lot more than that, though, don't we?
We look, I completely understand businesses now coming forward, say I'm hard hit, and they have every right to make those representations to government. The Chancellor and his team are listening. I think the Chancellor has done an excellent job throughout this pandemic in dealing with this, and no doubt he will keep things under review.
Whose fault was the North Shropshire by-election result?
It was our fault.
Define our.
The Conservative Party, collectively. You know, we didn't...
What did you get wrong?
I think we got a number of things wrong. How we handled the Owen Paterson affair was wrong, and I've said that before. I regret my role in that, but that was wrong, and I think that was hugely damaging, of course, because he was there.
Produced the by-election,
of course, and a lot of his constituents wouldn't have liked what had happened, and I think some of the recent news around whether there were gatherings in Number 10 or not gatherings or whatever, all this stuff, or even Christmas parties. So what has or has not happened, the fact that it's being investigated, that hasn't helped. But all I would say is, so it's a disappointing result. Let's not sugarcoat it and pretend that there's some good lining in it.
Disappointing.
I think you can say what you like, but I think I'm being very straight with you that it was not the result that any one of us wanted to see. But we now have to learn lessons. We have to listen, in particular, to the people of North Shropshire and the things that they want to see, whether that's investment, it's jobs, it's opportunities, and hope that at the next election we can win it back.
So it now turns out that one of the Christmas parties took place in the office of the man that's been appointed to investigate the Christmas parties. Is the investigation into the Christmas parties now going to include the man that you appointed to investigate the parties?
Well, the investigation is taking place by Sue Gray, who's a very experienced, well-respected civil servant. She will be able to investigate what she wants. If she wants to investigate one particular individual,
she's going to be investigating her boss, Simon Case, which is never an easy thing to do.
She has the freedom, as I understand, to go wherever she wants with this investigation. That's the way it should be, because people want to know the facts, and this is the best way to establish them.
If it turns out that Simon Case was at that party, do you think he should stand down as Cabinet Secretary?
I'm not going to predetermine the outcome of any investigation. That's work for Sue Gray to be doing.
Now, I know if I say to you, is it time for the Prime Minister to stand aside? He's had the most appalling week of headlines, and it goes on with Lord Frost and all the rest of it. You'll say, don't be silly, Andrew.
I would say that.
You would say that. But what I'm going to ask you is something more serious, and I'm sure you'll give me a serious answer, is clearly things have gone wrong at the centre of government, however you define that. Clearly something is not working. What do you think needs to be changed to get this government back on track?
Look, I've shared with you, I think some things have gone wrong. I've been very clear about that. But a lot has gone right. And I think what we need to do is obviously learn the lessons from those things that have gone wrong and keep focusing on those things that everyone wants to see that are going very well. Even we've started by discussing the pandemic. We are in a much stronger position today as a country as we head into Christmas with the threat of this new variant than we have ever been. Why is that? Because we've got the most successful vaccination program in Europe, the best booster program in Europe. We've got the new treatments, antivirals. We made the right decision to open up in the summer. We've got the best testing system in Europe. And these are all decisions that were made by the government.
But at the centre of government, I come back to this, something is going wrong. Boris Johnson used to be the man who could take the Conservative message into parts of the country nobody else could. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. He was the man who made much of the country laugh. The laughter has died. What do you think needs to happen? Do you think Boris Johnson can carry on, or do you think he needs to change in some way, or get a different team around him? What needs to change?
Well, I think that we talked about North Shropshire, and I said it's a very disappointing result. But just a couple of weeks before that, there was another by-election. We comfortably won that by-election. So I wouldn't want to read too much into one election. But what can I say before I go? I was really privileged to be your final guest on your final show. I started watching your show 17 years ago. I wasn't even a politician, but I loved your show, and I want to wish you all the very, very best.
So we're responsible for it. Sajid Javid, thank you very much indeed. That is it. All over. I have been so lucky and so privileged to share so many Sunday mornings with you. The wonderful Sophie Rayworth will be taking over now, and then who knows? Now, these shows are never just about the person whose name's on the tin. They're also about the fabulous team behind them. So, as the titles roll, just take a moment today to look at the names of all the people who really make this happen. We will end with Jeneba and Konya, two of the Kanneh-Mason family musicians, playing us out on this final programme with some specially arranged music. I have been wondering how to close this final show, but I can't do better than quoting my great mentor. You stay classy, San Diego.